The pregnancy test, sitting on the edge of my bathroom sink, had two lines on it. Two very clear, very pink, very undeniable lines. I had taken 4 of them over the course of the morning, each one from a different brand, as if some pharmaceutical company might have gotten their chemistry wrong, and I could find the one that told me what I wanted to hear. The first one said positive. The second one said pregnant in plain text, because apparently subtlety was no longer an industry standard. The third had a little digital readout that said 3 to 4 weeks. The fourth, the one currently balanced on the porcelain like a tiny pink verdict, agreed with all the others. I sat on the cold tile floor of my bathroom, with my back against the bathtub, and my knees pulled to my chest, and stared at the ceiling until the shapes in the texture started to look like faces. Outside the window, the city was doing what it always did, loud and indifferent and relentlessly alive. A delivery truck rumbled past. Someone 3 floors down was arguing with their upstairs neighbor about bass frequencies. The smell of coffee drifted up from the cafe on the corner, the one I had been going to every morning for 2 years, the one whose barista knew my order before I opened my mouth. I was pregnant. 6 weeks ago, I had made a decision I was absolutely not going to think about anymore. That had been the deal I made with myself on the drive home from the hotel, the windows down even though it was cold, the radio playing something I couldn't hear over the sound of my own heartbeat, still refusing to slow down. I was not going to think about the way he had said my name. I was not going to think about the warmth of his hands, or the specific gravity of his attention when it was pointed entirely at me, like being the only lit room in a dark building. I was not going to think about Jake Austen. I had been thinking about Jake Austen every single day for 6 weeks. And now, I was going to have to think about him for considerably longer than that. The industry conference where I met him had been in the kind of hotel that exists in a permanent state of beige, all carpet and mood lighting and the faint smell of recycled air. I worked for Harland & Voss, a mid-sized consulting firm with a good reputation and a flexible remote policy, which was the only reason I had been there at all. My manager, Carol, had sent me in her place because her daughter's school play was the same weekend, and in her words, I was the one who actually read the industry briefs. I was not a social person at conferences. I had a strategy. Attend the morning panels, take meticulous notes, find the free catering, retreat to my room by 9, and answer emails in my pajamas while watching whatever was on television. It was a good strategy. It had served me well for 4 years of professional life as an omega who preferred the company of spreadsheets to the ambient scent noise of a room full of alphas and betas, all performing their status at one another. The problem with that strategy was that on the second evening, the hotel bar was the only place still serving food, and I had not eaten since noon, and the salmon canapes at the afternoon networking session did not count as a meal, regardless of what anyone said. He was sitting at the far end of the bar when I came in. I noticed him the way you notice a fire in a cold room, that immediate, involuntary orientation of the body toward warmth and light. He was tall, even sitting down, broad across the shoulders in a way that his dark blazer couldn't entirely contain. He had dark hair that looked like it had started the day styled, and then decided partway through to do something more interesting. He was nursing a glass of something amber and reading something on his phone with a small frown that suggested it was either important or annoying, probably both. I sat at the opposite end of the bar and ordered a club sandwich and a sparkling water and pointedly looked at the mirrored wall behind the bar, where the bottles were stacked in neat rows and the lights were warm, and I absolutely was not watching him in the reflection. He caught me watching him in the reflection about 4 minutes later. Not in an embarrassing way. He just looked up from his phone, and our eyes met in the mirror, and he tilted his head slightly, like he was considering something, and then he smiled. It was not a polished practice smile, the kind you see from alphas who know exactly what they are and what effect they have. It was a real one, a little uneven, the kind that has some private amusement in it, and it made something in my chest do a complicated thing that I filed immediately under Do Not Examine. I looked away. I ate half my sandwich. I made a project of being very interested in the label on my sparkling water. "You're at the conference," he said, and when I looked up he had moved, was now 3 seats away, close enough to talk, but not so close it felt like pressure. "I saw you in the panel this morning, the one about regulatory compliance frameworks." "That panel was 2 hours long," I said, most of the room left by the first hour. He set his glass down. You stayed and took notes the entire time. I take my job seriously. So do I. He offered his hand. Jake Austen. Daniel Ellison. His handshake was firm without being a demonstration, and he held on just a beat longer than strictly professional, not in a way that felt calculated, but in a way that felt like he simply hadn't finished the thought yet. Up close, he smelled like cedar and something warmer underneath, something that sat right at the edge of my ability to categorize and refuse to move. Alpha. Clearly, but not the sharp, aggressive kind that made the back of my neck want to do something embarrassing. This was the slow burn kind, the kind that accumulated. We talked for 3 hours. I don't know how it happened exactly. I had a theory that it was because he asked questions and actually listened to the answers, which is rarer than it should be, and because he had opinions that were genuinely his own, and not just the opinions of whatever room he had been standing in most recently. He worked in strategic development, he said, which was vague enough that I didn't push on it. He traveled a lot. He read constantly, and seemed slightly embarrassed about how much he enjoyed fiction. He had a younger sister he adored, and a complicated relationship with competitive chess that he described as a sickness and a gift in equal measure. By the time the bar was closing, I had forgotten to be guarded. That was the only excuse I had, and I have spent 6 weeks examining it from every angle, and it remains the only one I have. He walked me to my room. I told myself he was just being courteous. When we reached my door, and I had the key card in my hand, and he was standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of him without quite touching, I told myself nothing at all, because my brain had gone very quiet and very simple, reduced to the fundamental calculus of want. I would very much like to come in, he said quietly. Not an alpha command, not anything that bypassed my own judgment, just a man asking, his voice low and his eyes steady on mine, giving me every opportunity to say no. I said yes. The morning was soft and gray, and I woke before him, which was fortunate. I lay still for a long moment in the unfamiliar hotel sheets, with the city beginning its noise outside, and his arm warm and heavy across my waist, and had a very calm, very clear conversation with myself about what this was and what it was not. It was one night, extraordinary in the specific way that certain nights are, the kind you know even while they're happening, that you will not forget. It was not a beginning. I was not built for those kinds of beginnings. I had a job and a careful life and a very fine system for being alone that had served me adequately for 28 years. I dressed quietly. He stirred when I picked up my bag, and I watched him swim up toward consciousness with that specific unguarded look that people have in the 3 seconds before they are fully awake, when they are still themselves without any performance layered on top. Daniel. Just my name. Just that. I have a panel at 8, I said, which was true. He looked at me for a moment, and I could not entirely read his expression, which was unusual for me because I was generally good at reading people. Then he nodded, and there was something in the way he did it that felt like acceptance, but not quite like relief, and I filed that too in the folder I was not opening. Take my number, he said. Jake. I know. Take it anyway. In case. I took it. I saved it under the letter J in my contacts. I did not call it. So that was 6 weeks ago, and now there were 4 positive pregnancy tests on my bathroom sink, and I needed to call my doctor, and I needed to call my mother eventually, God help me, and I needed to somehow organize my thoughts into something resembling a plan. What I was not going to do was contact Jake Austen. We were strangers who had spent one night together and parted without promises. He had no idea I was an Omega. I had not been wearing suppressants at the time, because I had been between prescriptions and the conference was only a weekend, and I had not imagined for one single second that it would matter. It mattered enormously. I made an appointment with my doctor for the following week. I bought prenatal vitamins and hid them in my desk drawer at home. I spent 3 days in a state of something that was not quite grief, and not quite fear, and not quite wonder, but had elements of all three, like a weather system that couldn't make up its mind. On the 4th day, I went back to work. Harland and Voss occupied the 14th through 16th floors of a glass and steel building in the financial district. I had been with the company since I graduated, working my way from junior analyst to senior consultant, which was a title that sounded more impressive than the number of late nights it had cost me. I was good at my job. I was methodical and thorough, and I could read a balance sheet the way other people read novels, finding the story hidden inside the numbers. The office was busy when I arrived that Monday morning. the particular busyness of a workplace in transition. There had been a memo the previous week about structural changes in the Strategic Development Division, which was 2 floors above me, and therefore not my concern. I had skimmed it and filed it and returned to my quarterly projections. Carol was waiting at my desk with 2 coffees and the expression she wore when she was trying to look casual and failing. "Morning," she said, handing me one of the coffees. "What happened?" Carol only brought coffee when something had happened. "Nothing bad. Probably. There's a new senior director starting today. Strategic Development and Client Relations, which apparently now also includes oversight of the analysis teams." She paused. "Which includes us. So we have a new boss. A new boss's boss. He's joining from Meridian Group. Very impressive record. Brought in 3 major accounts in 2 years." She was doing the thing where she delivered information while watching my face very carefully for reaction. "His name is Jake Austin." The coffee was hot in my hand. The carpet was steady under my feet. The fluorescent lights continued their eternal hum. "Interesting," I said. My voice sounded completely normal. I was extremely proud of my voice. "Apparently he's very well regarded," Carol continued, watching me. "Very sharp, collaborative management style, supposedly." "Good to know." I set my coffee down and opened my laptop and logged in with completely steady hands. "Was there anything else?" "The team meeting is at 11. He's doing a round of introductions. I'll be there." Carol lingered for a moment longer, then took her coffee and went back to her own desk. I stared at my monitor. My screensaver was a slowly rotating photograph of a lighthouse, which I had chosen because it was soothing and had no emotional associations for me. Jake Austin. Jake Austin was going to be my new director. Jake Austin, who had my phone number saved in his contacts under Daniel from the conference, and whose number I had saved under the letter J because I had been trying to be subtle with myself and had failed entirely, was going to be my boss. I was 7 weeks pregnant with his child. I took a long, slow breath through my nose. Then I opened my quarterly projections and began working through them with methodical focus. Because if there was one thing my life had taught me, it was that the work was always there, and the work did not care about your personal disasters. And sometimes that was a comfort. The meeting room on the 14th floor had a glass wall that looked out over the open-plan office and a long oval table with 12 chairs that were always slightly the wrong height for the table, a mystery no one had ever resolved. I arrived 3 minutes early, which was my standard. Carter from Risk Analysis was already there, and Priya from Client Engagement, and 4 others from the various teams that apparently now constituted the expanded Strategic Division. He walked in at 11 exactly. Different suit than the conference. This one was navy, precise, the kind that existed at the specific intersection of authority and ease. He still had the dark hair and the slight unevenness in his smile, and the way of carrying himself through a room like he had never in his life needed to announce his arrival. He saw me. I know he saw me, because there was a fraction of a second, a single compressed moment, where everything in his expression did something very small and very involuntary. And then it smoothed out, and he was addressing the room, and the moment was gone so quickly that I could have convinced myself I imagined it. I was not going to imagine it. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Jake Austin, joining as Senior Director of Strategy and Client Relations. I know organizational changes can feel disruptive, and I want to be upfront that my primary goal here is to support the work already being done, not to overhaul it. The teams at Harland and Voss have an excellent reputation, and I'm here to learn as much as to lead." He paused, looking around the room with the same unhurried attention he had given me at the conference bar. "I'd love to go around and have everyone introduce themselves briefly. Name, role, what you're currently working on. Let's start on the left." He was good at this, genuinely, infuriatingly good at it. He listened when people spoke. He asked follow-up questions that were specific rather than generic, which meant he had already read our files, which meant he was prepared, which was both professionally impressive and personally terrifying. When he reached Carter, he knew about the Pemberton account. When he reached Priya, he mentioned a paper she had written 2 years ago in an industry journal. When he reached me, he was looking at his notepad. "Daniel Ellison," I said, "Senior Consultant, Analysis Division, currently working on the Q3 projections for the Whitmore portfolio and the preliminary framework for the Ashton Group acquisition." He wrote something down, then he looked up, and his eyes met mine across the table, and he said, "Excellent. The Ashton framework is on my reading list this week. I'd like to schedule a debrief once you've had a chance to see my notes." "Of course," I said. Welcome to the team, Daniel. Thank you. 11 words, collectively. That was our entire interaction. Carol, sitting 2 chairs to my left, glanced at me with a look I couldn't interpret, and I returned my attention to my notepad with the focused calm of a man who had never in his life made a single impulsive decision at a hotel bar. 3 days passed. I avoided the 16th floor with the dedication of someone who had made a careful geographic peace with a large predator. I sent emails. I attended meetings on my own floor. I took the stairs instead of the elevator on the days when I could hear, through some trick of the building's acoustics, that the elevator was stopping on 16. My doctor confirmed the pregnancy at my appointment. 8 weeks along, healthy, all the preliminary markers looked normal. She was kind and thorough and gave me a stack of literature about prenatal care for omegas, which I carried home in my bag and read at my kitchen table with a glass of ginger tea because the nausea had started, low grade and persistent, like a bad radio frequency running underneath everything. She asked about the other parent. I said it was complicated. She did not push. The nausea was manageable in the mornings if I ate something small before I got out of bed, a strategy I had read about online at 2 in the morning during one of the sleep interruptions that were also new. Crackers, plain crackers. I kept a sleeve of them on my nightstand and ate 4 of them before I even sat up, which felt deeply undignified. But the alternative was spending 20 minutes kneeling over the bathroom tiles, and I had too much dignity left for that. At work, I was fine. I told myself I was fine repeatedly, and the repetition helped somewhat. On Thursday, the email came. The subject line was Ashton Group Framework, Initial Notes. The sender was Jake Austin. I stared at it for a full minute before I opened it. It was professional, thorough. He had read the entire framework, and his notes were good, actually very good, the kind of engaged, critical reading that you don't always get from people several levels above you in the hierarchy. He identified 2 structural assumptions he wanted to interrogate and 1 analytical gap that I had noted myself and flagged for a second pass. He wrote in complete sentences with no unnecessary padding. At the bottom below the notes, would Thursday at 4 work for a debrief? I'm free all afternoon. I typed, Thursday at 4 works. Conference room B? He responded within 2 minutes. Perfect. See you then. I closed the email and ate 3 crackers and looked at the lighthouse on my screensaver for a long time. Conference room B was a smaller room on the 14th floor. No glass wall, just 4 chairs and a table and a whiteboard and a window that looked out over the alley between buildings. I arrived 4 minutes early and arranged my notes and reminded myself that I was a professional with 4 years of excellent performance reviews and a genuine expertise in financial analysis, and that whatever this meeting might feel like personally, it was professionally a routine debrief. He knocked on the open door at 4 exactly. Daniel. A nod. He set a folder and a coffee on the table across from me, and I was immediately grateful for the table between us, because the scent of him hit me in a way that my body had apparently decided was different now, amplified, more complex, a cedar warmth that my pregnancy-sharpened senses picked apart like music. I had read that scent sensitivity changed. I had not been emotionally prepared for this particular application of that fact. Jake, I kept my voice level. Thanks for the notes. They were thorough. The framework is strong. The gap on page 12 is the one I want to start with. He opened his folder. No preamble, no circling. Straight to the work. I found this both professionally ideal and a minor mercy, because small talk would have required a version of me that was currently unavailable. We worked through the framework systematically. He challenged assumptions without dismissing the underlying logic. When I pushed back, he listened and conceded 2 points and held firm on the third with reasoning I could not fault. His handwriting in the margins of my document was small and precise, and occasionally illegible when he was moving fast. At some point in the second hour, something in the meeting room shifted. Not dramatically, just that the professional distance between us, maintained so carefully on both sides, had gotten slightly thinner without either of us doing it deliberately. We were leaning toward each other over the documents. His voice had dropped a register without him apparently noticing. He stopped mid-sentence. Daniel, he said, and it was a different word than all the other times he had said my name that afternoon. Quieter, more careful. The assumption on the discount rate, I said, not looking up from the document. A pause. Right. He went back to the document. We finished at 6. Neither of us had noticed the time passing. He gathered his notes, and I gathered mine, and we stood up at the same time on opposite sides of the table. And for one very full second, we were just two people standing in a small room, looking at each other. "Good meeting," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "Same time next week for the second phase?" "I'll send a calendar invite." He nodded, started toward the door, stopped, one hand on the frame, with his back half to me. "How are you?" Not a casual question, the specific gravity of someone who actually wants to know. "I'm well," I said. Professional question or personal one? He turned, and the small, uneven smile was there, just briefly. "Both, I suppose. Professionally, I'm making good progress. Personally, I'm managing." He held my gaze for another moment. "All right." And then he was gone, and I sat back down in my chair and breathed very carefully through my nose until the room smelled like conference room again, industrial and neutral and safe. 9 weeks, 10 weeks, 11. The nausea began to ease by 10 weeks, which was a mercy, replaced by a hunger so specific and relentless that I began keeping a detailed internal inventory of what my body wanted and when. This was inconvenient at work, but manageable. I ate small meals at my desk. I took the stairs slowly now, which I attributed to bad knees when Carol raised an eyebrow. My body was changing, slowly at first, and then with increasing commitment. I was not showing at 10 weeks, not really. Just a softness at my middle that I could explain away with a looser shirt, a higher waistline, the kind of thing you only noticed if you were looking. I wore layers. I bought 2 sizes up in my work trousers and told myself it was about comfort, which was true in ways I didn't want to fully enumerate. The weekly debriefs continued. Jake was unfailingly professional, which I appreciated and found maddening in equal proportion. He treated me with the specific, attentive respect he seemed to treat everyone, without any of the cagey awkwardness that I had braced for, the kind that comes from shared history, crammed into a professional container too small for it. Either he was extraordinarily composed, or he was better at this than I was. I suspected both. 12 weeks. I had my second trimester screening. Everything was developing as it should. The sonographer pointed out the heartbeat, which was a small, rapid, insistent flutter on the screen, and I sat very still and felt the floor of something I had been standing on shift several inches in a direction I couldn't name. That evening, I got home and cooked an entire pot of soup and ate most of it, and cried for about 20 minutes, and then felt significantly better. I called my mother. "Daniel," she said, the way she always answered, just my name, like an acknowledgement. "Hi, Mom." A pause. She had been an Omega herself, and she was extraordinarily perceptive in the way that sometimes felt like a gift and sometimes felt like a very sophisticated surveillance system. Something happened. A lot of things happened. "Tell me," I told her, not all of it. She was quiet for a long time when I finished, which was how I knew she was thinking rather than reacting. "Are you well?" she asked finally. "I'm fine. The pregnancy is healthy. The doctor says everything looks good." "And the father?" I looked at the wall across from my couch. "He's at my work now. He doesn't know." Another silence. "Daniel, I know. He has a right to know. I know that too. But I need to do it in the right way, and I haven't figured out what that is yet." She made the small sound she made when she thought I was being stubborn, and also thought I knew it. "Don't wait too long." "I won't," I said, and I meant it, and I believed it, and I was also 12 weeks pregnant, and had not yet found the version of that conversation that didn't feel like detonating something I wasn't ready to lose. 13 weeks is where it became undeniable. Not to the office in general, not yet, but to me, and increasingly, in the small accumulation of daily evidence, to Carol. The slightly different way I moved, the way I touched my stomach sometimes without thinking about it, just a hand resting there for a moment, an unconscious territorial thing. The way certain smells sent me in rapid retreat. The 3-part adaptation of my wardrobe that I had thought was subtle, but probably wasn't. Carol said nothing for 2 weeks. Then, on a Thursday, she came to my desk and sat in the extra chair and turned it to face me and folded her hands in her lap with the air of a woman who had organized her thoughts carefully before arriving. "I'm not going to pry," she said. "Good," I said, "but I am your manager and I care about you, and there are accommodations available through HR that you should know about." I looked at her. She looked back at me with the specific patient kindness of someone who has already done the math and is waiting for you to catch up. 13 weeks, I said, which was not what I had planned to say, but was apparently what my mouth had decided. Carol exhaled slowly. Okay. She nodded, once, the way people nod when they are processing something that is more than they were expecting, even when they were expecting something. Okay. You're well? Everything is healthy? Everything is healthy. Do you have support? Is someone helping you? My mother knows. I'm managing. She looked at me steadily. The father? I turned back to my screen. She let it go. Carol was good at knowing when to let things go. HR has a formal accommodation process, flexible hours, private space for appointments. When you're ready to make it official, I'll walk you through it. She stood up. Then she paused. I've noticed the meetings are going well. Jake speaks highly of your work. I did not react visibly to his name. I was getting very good at not reacting visibly to his name. I'm glad to hear it. He specifically mentioned the Ashton framework in the director's meeting, said it was the strongest analysis he'd reviewed since joining. I allowed myself to feel about 30% of the warmth that this created somewhere in my chest, which was a reasonable amount and not pathetic. I'll tell him you said so, Carol added, and left before I could respond. 14 weeks and I had a belly. Not enormous, not undeniable from across the room, but present. Physically real, visible in my work shirts despite the deliberate layering, despite the strategic use of cardigans and blazers, visible to anyone who was paying attention in the right direction. The debrief that week ran long because we had hit a genuinely complex modeling problem in the Ashton framework, a multivariable projection that had 3 plausible interpretations and no clean way to choose between them without additional data. We were at the whiteboard, both of us on our feet, and I had taken off my blazer because the room was warm, and I was writing a formula when he stopped responding. Not loudly. He just went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something has changed in them, a new information in the air. I finished writing the formula. Then I put the cap back on the marker and turned around. He was looking at my midsection. Not in an unkind way, not in a way I could easily categorize at all. Just looking, with an expression I recognized from the hotel bar when he had been working out whether to say something. Daniel, he said. I set the marker on the whiteboard tray. Which interpretation did you favor? For the multivariable problem. Daniel. Jake. Which interpretation? He looked up from my stomach to my face, and the expression didn't change much, just deepened somehow, gained more layers than I could read quickly. How far along are you? The room was very quiet. 14 weeks, I said. He went still in a specific way, the stillness of a person doing rapid mathematics in a context that is both precise and enormous. I watched him do it. I watched the exact moment the calculation finished. The conference, he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer it. Daniel. He said my name again, and each time he said it, it was slightly different. This time it had something in it like the start of a question and the end of a breath held too long. Why didn't you? Because I didn't know how. Honest. Cleaner than most of the things I had planned to say. He pressed 2 fingers to his forehead, briefly, not in frustration exactly, more like someone reorganizing a very full shelf. Then he dropped his hand and looked at me. And the expression on his face was something I had to look away from because it was too open and too close, and I was not ready for it. Are you well? He asked. Same question he asked every week, different weight. Healthy, I said. Both of us. The room held that word for a moment. Both of us. I want to be involved, he said. Quiet, certain, not a demand, not a negotiation, just a statement of fact about himself that he was offering for my consideration. I know, I said. And I did know. Somewhere I had known since the moment I took the first test and looked at the letter J in my contacts. I had known that this was not the kind of situation that resolves itself quietly, and I had known that part of the reason it didn't was because some part of me did not entirely want it to. We should talk. Properly. Not here. He looked around the conference room. Not in this building. All right. Tonight, after work, I thought about my crackers and my soup and my careful evenings. There's a cafe on the corner of Fielding and Main. They close at 9. He nodded. 7, I agreed. He picked up his folder and his jacket from the back of his chair, and as he passed the whiteboard, he stopped and looked at the formula I had written. The multivariable projection with its 3 unresolved interpretations. Interpretation B, he said, with a sensitivity analysis on the 3rd variable. I'll run the numbers tonight before 7. He left. I stood in the conference room alone with the whiteboard and the evening light coming in gray through the window, and my hand resting, without my meaning it to, gently against the curve of my stomach. Okay, I said quietly. To myself, to both of us. The cafe was the kind of warm that felt intentional rather than accidental. Wooden tables and mismatched chairs, and the smell of coffee and baked things, and the low murmur of other people's conversations. I was there at 6:55. The table I chose had a view of the door. He was there at 6:59. He had changed out of his work clothes, which surprised me. Dark jeans and a gray knit sweater, which felt like a deliberate gesture of informality. A come as you actually are, rather than as you present professionally. He ordered at the counter and came to sit across from me, and in the warm light of the cafe, with the professional context stripped away, he looked like the person I had talked to for 3 hours at a hotel bar 6 weeks into my life's current chapter. Familiar in a way that wasn't entirely about the time we'd spent together. Thank you for agreeing to this, he said. I was going to tell you, I said. I was working out how. I believe you. No resentment in it, just the straightforward delivery of something he had apparently actually decided. I won't pretend I wasn't blindsided, but I understand why it was complicated. It's still complicated. You're my director. I know. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. I talked to legal on the walk over here. You talked to legal. I wanted to know what the policy framework was before we had this conversation. I didn't want to say something that created a problem I hadn't thought through. He looked at me steadily. There's a formal disclosure and recusal protocol. If there's a personal relationship with someone in the reporting chain, there are options that protect both parties, reassignment of oversight being the most common. It would mean someone else handles your formal reviews. I looked at him. You did that on the walk over. I called someone I know in their HR department. She was helpful. Something about the sheer competence of this, the fact that he had used the 20-minute window between our conversation and this one to learn the relevant policy framework rather than arrive unprepared to an important conversation, was doing something to my chest that I was not going to examine closely right now. I don't want things to be awkward for you at work, I said. I'm less concerned about me. He studied me for a moment. What do you want, Daniel, from this situation? Just say it plainly. The cafe moved around us. Someone laughed at a nearby table. The espresso machine hissed. I want the baby to have both parents if that's possible, I said. I want to handle this like two adult people and not like a disaster. I want it to not destroy my career, which I have worked very hard for, and I stopped, looked at my tea. I would like it if we could figure out what we are to each other, outside of the professional situation, without rushing. Because I don't actually know you, and you don't actually know me, and we have something substantial to figure out, and I'd rather do it right than fast. He was quiet for a moment. Then, those are all reasonable things. I know. I can work with all of those. He paused. I should tell you something. All right? I thought about you, after the conference. He said it without any particular drama, the same way he delivered the policy framework, as a piece of relevant information. More than I expected to. I'm not someone who typically has difficulty letting things go. It's not a boast. It's just usually how I am. But you were different. He looked at me across the small table. I didn't know what to do with that. And then you didn't call. And I told myself that was the end of it and got on with things. A slight pause. And then I walked into a meeting room and you were sitting across a conference table from me. And for about 4 seconds, I had a very serious conversation with my own nervous system. I felt the corner of my mouth move. 4 seconds is a long time. It felt longer. And there it was, the real smile, the uneven one, the one that did the complicated thing to my chest that it had been doing since the hotel bar. I didn't call because I was afraid it would matter, I said, which was the most honest I had been with anyone except my own bathroom ceiling. And now? And now I'm 14 weeks pregnant, and my new director is the father, and I have been eating crackers before I get out of bed every morning and hiding prenatal vitamins in my desk drawer. So the question of whether it matters feels somewhat resolved. He laughed, a genuine one, low and warm, and it happened so unexpectedly that I felt my whole body relax in response. Some held tension I had been carrying for weeks, letting go of itself without asking my permission. Crackers before getting up, he said. Does that help? Enormously. Plain ones, no salt. I'll remember that. The weight of what he meant by that sat between us, easy and enormous at once. We talked until the cafe closed, not about logistics, not mostly, about the things that matter more. He told me about his family, more than he had at the conference, his father who was restrained with praise but showed up to everything, his sister who was doing her doctorate in marine biology and who he called every Sunday without fail. He told me he had wanted to be an architect before finance caught him in its practical gravity, and that he still sometimes sketched buildings on the backs of meeting agendas. I told him about my mother's herb garden and the way I had learned to read as a very young child and then essentially not stopped, and about the year after university when I'd been terrified I had chosen the wrong path until I sat down with a particularly complex financial model and felt for the first time the specific pleasure of a system yielding its logic to careful attention. I told him about the way the number spoke to me like a language, and he listened with the same quality of attention he gave everything, complete and unhurried. Outside, the city was doing its nighttime version of itself, fewer people and lower sounds, and the particular light of street lamps on wet pavement. He walked with me to the corner where I turned toward my building. Same time next week, he said. Not for work. Not for work, I agreed. And then very carefully, he reached over and tucked a loose end of my scarf more securely, a gesture so small and domestic that it caught me completely unprepared. His fingers barely touched my shoulder. Get some rest, he said, both of you. I walked home through the street lamp light and the cool air and my own heartbeat, which had decided to make its presence known in a way it hadn't for 6 weeks, and thought about the word both, which he had used twice now in the same evening, the same careful, deliberate inclusion. We told HR the following week. Jake handled the disclosure with the thoroughness I was coming to understand was simply how he approached everything, carefully documented, policy compliant, nothing left vague. My formal reviews were transferred to Carol, which had been the case in practice for years anyway. Professionally, almost nothing changed. Personally, everything was shifting, quietly and steadily, the way seasons shift, not dramatically, but with a momentum that becomes undeniable when you look back and realize what is different. We had dinner on Wednesdays, not in restaurants that felt like dates, not at first. The cafe, or the Thai place 2 blocks from my building, or occasionally his apartment, which was organized with the same precision as his professional life, but had more books than I had expected, and a ridiculous collection of chess puzzles printed and pinned above his desk. He cooked well. Simple things, confidently executed. I was 16 weeks when I reached across the table for the last piece of bread, and he got there at the same moment, and we both stopped, hands near each other's, and looked up, and he turned his hand so that his fingers closed around mine instead. We stayed like that for a moment. This doesn't have to be complicated, he said quietly. It's already complicated, I pointed out. I mean between us. The rest of it is complicated. This part could be simple, if we let it. I looked at our hands on the table. I'm not sure I know how to be simple. I don't think you mean simple. I think you mean uncomplicated. He turned my hand over in his, studying it like it was a document worth reading carefully. Nothing about you is simple. That's not what I meant. What did you mean? I meant we don't have to perform uncertainty if we're not actually uncertain. I was quiet for a long moment. What are you certain of? He looked up from my hand. That I want to be here. That I have wanted to be here since the moment I saw you across that conference room with your notes and your sparkling water and your very determined intention to not be interested in talking to me. I was interested, I said. I know, it was very obvious. That's rude. I thought it was charming. He wasn't smiling, but the voice was doing the thing that was the equivalent of a smile. I'm certain about you, Daniel. Whatever arrangement or timeline you need, I'm not going anywhere. He paused. That's what I'm certain of. What about you? I looked at him across the table, his hand warm around mine, the restaurant moving around us in its cheerful indifference. 16 weeks pregnant, my body rearranging itself around a new life, my carefully organized professional world shuffled into a new configuration. Everything was different than it had been 4 months ago. Everything was more. I'm certain I don't want you to go anywhere, I said. He brought my hand up and pressed his mouth to my knuckles, which was a gesture so quiet and definite that it knocked the breath out of me in a very dignified way. Good, he said. Then we're agreed. 18 weeks and I had a proper bump. Not enormous by any measure, but round and present and entirely impossible to camouflage. I had stopped trying, which was its own kind of relief. I had made the formal announcement to the team, which Carol had helped me prepare, brief and factual, and receiving the kind of response that ranged from warmly congratulatory to professionally neutral, all of which was fine with me. Jake had not been in the announcement meeting because we had decided together that the professional and the personal were their own distinct territories and deserved to be maintained clearly. At work, we were director and consultant, nothing more. He addressed me by my last name in group settings, and I addressed him by his. And if there was occasionally something in the corner of a shared glance that contained more than professional regard, neither of us imported it into the meeting agenda. Outside work was different. Outside work, he came to my doctor's appointment at 20 weeks. I had not asked him, and he had not announced it. He had simply said the date and time and looked at me, and when I nodded, something in his shoulders settled that had apparently been waiting for that. The appointment took 40 minutes. The sonographer was efficient and kind and pointed out the 4 chambers of the heart and the measurement of the spine and the rounded curve of a head that I looked at and felt something enormous and wordless move through me like weather. Jake was very still beside me, through all of it. Still in the way that is the opposite of absent, concentrated still. Everything in him pointed at the screen. When we were outside afterward, walking in the winter afternoon, he said nothing for a full block. I waited. I wasn't prepared for that, he said finally. No one ever is. He stopped, tried again. There's a person in there. I know. A whole person. He looked sideways at me with an expression that was somewhere between overwhelmed and illuminated. I knew that. Obviously I knew that, but watching the spine, Daniel, the spine was just... The spine is very moving, I agreed, gently. He stopped walking, and I stopped too, there on the winter pavement, and he put his arms around me with a care that had both certainty and the slight tentativeness of someone learning the geography of something new and wanting to get it right. I leaned into him, my bump between us, the small city afternoon moving around us uninterested. I want to do this right, he said, against my hair. I need you to know that. Not just the logistical pieces, all of it. I want to do all of it right. You're doing well so far, I said. I've been reading, a slight sheepish quality, books about pregnancy and about being a co-parent and about, there's quite a lot of literature. There is quite a lot of literature. Some of it is conflicting. Most of it is conflicting. I've been annotating, he said, which was so thoroughly him that I laughed, warm against his chest, and felt his arms tighten a fraction in response. Annotating the pregnancy books, I said. I would not expect anything less. I have questions. I'm sure you do. Many specific questions. We can go through them, I said. All of them. Tonight if you want. He pressed his mouth to the top of my head. Tonight, he agreed. 22 weeks. 24. The baby was the length of a head of lettuce, then an eggplant, then a cauliflower, according to the weekly app I had downloaded that measured development in produce terms for reasons I found both useful and slightly absurd. Jake stopped being a guest in my life and started being a presence in it. Not overnight, not in a declaration. Just the accumulation of small permanences, the chess puzzle book left on my coffee table, his reading glasses on my kitchen counter because he'd misplaced his other pair and mine was closer. The specific coffee he preferred, kept at the back of my refrigerator, next to the ginger ale I drank in the mornings. We had not rushed the thing between us. I had meant it when I said I wanted to do it right, rather than fast. But doing it right had its own momentum, and by the time I was 26 weeks along, and the baby was the size of an acorn squash, and I woke up on a Sunday morning to the sound of Jake in my kitchen making breakfast, I understood that the right and the fast had quietly and without announcement coincided. He was making eggs, the kind scrambled low and slow over gentle heat, the way he had learned I liked them, because I had mentioned it exactly once and he had simply remembered. He was reading something on his tablet, propped against the fruit bowl, still in yesterday's clothes, the dark hair doing the interesting thing it did when he had slept on it without care. I stood in the doorway of my kitchen in an oversized jumper that no longer quite reached the waistband of my pajama pants because of the cauliflower between us, and looked at him for a long moment. He looked up. Morning. How did you sleep? Well, I said, which was true. I had been sleeping better, which my doctor attributed to the second trimester, and which I privately attributed to the specific weight of his arm across me through the night. Eggs in 5 minutes, he said. I found the orange juice. It was in the back of the refrigerator. I know. behind the ginger ale. He went back to his reading. Then, without looking up, "Are you going to stand in the doorway or come in?" I came in. I sat at the kitchen table and poured a glass of juice and watched him finish the eggs and plate them with the same quiet competence with which he approached everything, and thought about what he had said in the cafe on the corner of Fielding and Main, that nothing about you is simple, and thought about how he had meant it as something else entirely, something that did not require simplicity, only willingness. He set the plate in front of me and then sat across the table with his own and picked up his tablet again, and we ate in the comfortable morning silence of people who have figured out that they can be quiet together and have it mean something good. The baby moved, not for the first time, but significantly, a real movement, an elbow or a heel pressing outward in a way that was unmistakable. I set down my fork and put my hand over the spot and said, without planning to, "Come here." He looked up. "Come here," I said again. He was around the table in a moment, and I took his hand and placed it where mine had been, and we both went very still, waiting. The baby moved again. Jake made a sound I'd never heard from him before. Not a word, just a sound, something undone by that small insistent pressure, and his hand curved over the curve of my stomach, like something he didn't know he knew how to do. "There you are," he said, so quietly it was almost not a sentence. To the baby, to this small, cauliflower-sized person insisting on their own reality from inside the landscape of my body. I watched his face, which was doing everything at once, the way faces do when something is too large for them to process in order. Overwhelmed and certain and open and soft and afraid in the particular way that love makes you afraid. The recognition of something you do not want to lose. "There you are," he said again. I covered his hand with mine. "Yeah," I said. "There we all are. 28 weeks and the office knew everything. Not because I had announced it in the sense of a formal statement, but because I was visibly, definitively, there is no other explanation pregnant, and in an office of 40 people, visible facts become general knowledge. The professional separation that Jake and I had maintained was respected and unremarked upon, because we had been careful and because people were generally decent about these things when given the framework to be. Carter, who sat adjacent to me in the open plan and whose small talk was mostly about sport, but who had a genuinely warm heart, started leaving a snack on my desk on Mondays. Just a small thing, crackers or fruit, or once an entire packet of shortbread with a yellow post-it that said, "Thought you might need these." I ate every shortbread and thanked him sincerely. Priya, who was sharp and perceptive and had probably worked out the entire situation weeks before the rest of the office, simply behaved as if none of it required any reaction whatsoever, which was the most sophisticated response available. Carol handled the accommodations with the efficiency and warmth that characterized everything she did. Flexible start time, private room for appointments, access to the wellness suite on the 15th floor, which had a couch and dim lighting and was primarily used by people having bad days, and which I used on 2 occasions to lie down for 20 minutes and watch the ceiling and breathe slowly and feel the baby move, and remind myself that the large and complicated thing I was living inside was also, in its essential nature, a good one. 30 weeks. The baby was the size of a large cabbage and had opinions about sleep positions, and had apparently decided that my left side was both their personal gymnastics studio and a legitimate grievance. My back ached by the end of work days. My ankles did a thing in the evenings that I preferred not to examine closely. I had a pillow system of significant complexity. Jake, who had by 30 weeks essentially relocated the essentials of his life to my apartment without any formal conversation about it, had adapted to the pillow system with the practical acceptance of someone approaching a logistical challenge. He was good at finding the arrangement that worked and maintaining it without complaint, which was a quality I had come to understand was not universal and was therefore remarkable. He had also, quietly and without announcement, taken over the Sunday evening meal prep for the week, the precise and efficient use of 2 hours to produce food that required minimal effort on weekday evenings. I had not asked him to do this. I had come home one Sunday to find my refrigerator organized with labeled containers and had stood in the kitchen doorway with a complicated expression on my face that he had noticed. "You have enough to manage," he said, not looking up from the thing he was writing at my table. It made sense. "Jake? Thank you." He looked up then, studied me for a moment with the particular attention that still had not lost its capacity to make me feel thoroughly seen. "You're welcome," he said, then returning to his work. "There's soup for the week and the pasta dish you liked. Don't eat all the soup in the first 3 days." I make no promises about the soup. I know. Fond and resigned. I made extra. At 32 weeks, he asked me something important. Not in a formal way, not with any preceding pageantry. We were sitting on my couch on a Wednesday evening, his feet on the coffee table, and mine in his lap because my ankles were doing the thing, and he was reading one of the chess puzzle books, and I was finishing a report I had been putting off, and the apartment was quiet, with the particular quiet of two people who have run out of the need to fill silence. Daniel? I'd like us to live together, properly. Not the way we're doing it now, where half my things are here, and I still pay rent on an apartment I sleep at twice a week. He paused. This is already what we are. I'd like it to be official. I looked at him. He was looking at the chess puzzle book with the expression he had when he was pretending to be more casual than he was. Is that a question? I asked. It's a preference that I'm prepared to negotiate into a question if that's what you need. Something warm and certain settled through me. It's yes, I said. If you were negotiating it into a question, the answer would be yes. He looked up from the chess book. I'd like that, I said. I'd like it to be official. He put the chess book down and reached over to where my hand was resting on the report and covered it with his, and we sat there in the quiet apartment with the city doing its evening things outside and the baby doing their evening gymnastics inside, and something between us that was past the stage of becoming and had arrived, quietly and without ceremony, at what it simply was. We'll need a bigger place, he said. We will. I've been looking. There's a building on Calloway Street with 3 bedrooms and a study and a view of the park. You've seen a specific building. I've seen several. Calloway Street is the strongest candidate on the metric of location, space, and natural light per square foot. He paused. Also, it has a nice kitchen. You considered the kitchen separately. You cook better than I do, and you deserve a kitchen that supports that. I looked at him for a long moment. Jake Austin, Daniel Ellison. You are the most organized person I have ever met. Is that a complaint? Not even slightly, I said. He brought my hand up and pressed it to his mouth for a moment, and I thought about the hotel bar and the gray conference room and the 4 positive tests on the bathroom sink and every improbable step between one thing and the other, the way a life can reorganize itself around a single night and become, in its new configuration, larger and more itself than it had been before. We moved to the apartment on Calloway Street at 35 weeks. This was, my mother pointed out, not ideal timing, and she was correct. But the lease started when it started, and we were both practical people. Jake did the physical work with the help of his colleague and friend Marcus, who was large and good-natured, and who accepted the revelation of Jake's domestic circumstances with the philosophical equanimity of someone who had seen most things. You, Marcus said to me, sitting at my new kitchen counter, while Jake and the moving company assembled furniture in the other room, are very calm for a person who is 35 weeks pregnant and moving house on the same day. I've been calm the whole time, I said. It's a coping mechanism. Marcus considered this. Is it working? Extremely well most of the time. And today? I'm choosing not to examine today too closely until it's over. He nodded approvingly. Smart man. He accepted the coffee I pushed across the counter. He talks about you, Jake. He's not one for saying much, you know how he is. But when he does say something, lately it's been you. Just thought you should know. I looked at the kitchen wall. The paint was a very neutral gray that I already planned to change to something warmer. He's a good person, I said. The best one I know, Marcus said, which is why I'm very glad he found a good one too. From the other room, Jake's voice. Marcus, I need you in here. Coming. He took his coffee. At the kitchen door, he paused. I'll call you Ellison, if that's all right. He calls you Daniel, and it feels weird for someone else to. Ellison is fine, I said. He grinned and went. The night before the birth, I woke at 2 a.m. with a sharpness low across my back that was different from the ache I had been carrying for weeks, different in the way that certain things are different when they are definitively what they are. I lay still for a moment in our new bedroom with its neutral gray walls, taking inventory. Then I looked at Jake asleep beside me, his face slack and open in the way it got in sleep, the version of him before the day's competent arrangement of himself began. Jake, I said. He was awake almost instantly, the alpha in him surfacing from sleep, faster than most people moved from it. He looked at me in the dark. It's time, I said. He was out of bed and moving before I had finished the sentence, which in any other circumstances would have been funny. He was calm. Not the forced calm of someone suppressing panic, but genuinely calm, the calm of someone who is prepared and is now in the phase he is prepared for. He had a bag already packed. He knew which hospital. He had read the relevant literature, annotated it, and committed the key points to a memory I had come to trust as deeply reliable. He helped me up. His hands were steady. I thought about the bathroom floor and the 4 tests and the letter J in my contacts, and the crackers before getting up, and the chess puzzle books and the soup in labeled containers, and the specific weight of an arm across me through the night, and the feeling of a small spine on the sonogram screen, and the sound of his voice saying, "There you are." "Yes," I said. Our son was born at 7:43 in the morning, which was when the city was beginning to find its full volume again, the delivery rooms quiet with their own particular gravity while the world outside resumed its noise. He was loud about his arrival, which, Jake said, with a kind of exhausted wonder, seemed right, all things considered. He was small and red, and enormously himself immediately, which is the thing about babies that I had read about and still not been prepared for. The specific immediate personhood of them, the sense that whoever this was had already existed and had simply waited until now to introduce themselves. They put him on my chest. Jake was beside me with his hand on my shoulder, not gripping, just present, steady the way he was in all things. Our son made a sound, small and indignant, and Jake said something very quiet that I don't think was entirely meant for me to hear, and I was too tired and too undone to catch the exact words, only the tone of it, which was the tone of someone speaking to someone they had been waiting for. Later, much later, the room had the quieter quality of things resolved. Jake was sitting in the chair beside the bed, our son asleep on his chest, one enormous hand curved around a very small back, both of them equally committed to the sleep they had apparently agreed to have at the same time. I watched them. I thought about the word rearrange, and how it implied a disruption that preceded a new order, and how this felt less like disruption and more like addition, like finding a room in a house you have lived in for years and discovering it was there all along, waiting to be used. Jake opened his eyes, not all the way, just enough. "You should sleep," he said, "in a minute." He looked at me over the top of our son's head. The early light was coming through the blinds in soft horizontal lines. "Are you all right?" he asked. "More than all right," I said. The uneven smile, even now, even here, in this exhausted, enormous hour. "Good," he said. "Me too." And he closed his eyes again, and the room was quiet, and outside the city did its faithful morning things, and I held all of it, all of the improbable, particular, ordinary miracle of it, in the still space between one breath and the next. Opsis. The first thing I ever said to Jake Austin was a deflection. I was trying to avoid being interested in him and making a poor job of it. The first thing he said to me was an observation, something he had noticed because he had been paying attention. That, I think, is the thing that mattered most from the beginning. He paid attention, and when I became impossible to ignore, he simply paid more. Our son's name is Ellison Austin, which Jake suggested, and which I accepted after approximately 4 seconds of resistance, because it was the right name and we both knew it. He has his father's dark hair and an absolute conviction that mealtimes are a performance art, and strong opinions about which songs are acceptable before 7 in the morning. He is, in the precise and overwhelming word that I turned over in my head for 9 months before arriving at it, ours. Some things begin the way you expect. Some begin in a hotel bar on a conference weekend, when you have every intention of eating your club sandwich quietly and going to bed at a reasonable hour. Some begin with 4 positive pregnancy tests on a bathroom sink and the number J in your contacts that you are trying very hard not to call. Are the ones you couldn't have planned. The ones that arrive with all the inconvenient, beautiful, rearranging weight of something real. I would not have planned any of it. I would not change a single thing. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.